Chào quý vị khán giả của chương trình Cận cảnh FBNC. Thưa quý vị, chúng tôi rất vui gặp lại quý vị trong chương trình này. Chẳng mấy chốc, 60 ngày nữa thì chúng ta sẽ chia tay với năm 2014, một năm đầy ấn tượng. Thưa quý vị, vào những ngày tháng này, chắc chúng ta cũng mong muốn nhìn lại một năm 2014, đặc biệt là các vấn đề kinh tế diễn ra ở thế giới, châu Á, cũng như là Việt Nam như thế nào. Chính vì vậy, chúng tôi mời quý vị gặp lại một vị khách, một chuyên gia về tài chính nước ngoài đang làm việc tại Việt Nam, sẽ chia sẻ với chúng ta những cái nhìn riêng của ông về kinh tế thế giới, châu Á cũng như là kinh tế Việt Nam. Chúng tôi xin trân trọng giới thiệu với quý vị một vị khách mà chúng ta đã từng gặp trên chương trình FBNC trước đây, đó là ông Attila Vosdor. Ông Attila là giám đốc điều hành của công ty nghiên cứu tư vấn đầu tư Project Asia tại Singapore, và ông chuyên trách về lĩnh vực đầu tư tại Việt Nam.
Xin chào.
Hello, Mr. Attila. We are happy to meet up with you again in this interview show. This year, 2014, at the moment that we passed over 10 months already, if I just ask you how we can capture the first 10 months of 2014, the world economy, Asia economy, can you give me three most impressive image in your opinion?
I think if you look at the world economy or the world events, so to speak, it's really been a very eventful year. But if I would need to pick some pictures, probably relating to the world economy would be the Ukraine crisis, which I choose because I think it's a lot of crisis generally in the world that's creating a lot of pressure. If we look at Asia, probably I would choose the Chinese oil rig in Vietnam waters because I think it fundamentally will impact how ASEAN itself will develop and integrate. And of course, it has a major impact on how Vietnam will develop and integrate into ASEAN.
It means now we see the year 2014 is a quite difficult year. We see not just political affair, but I mean the economic affair. Do you think that the world so far have any progress in comparison with last year?
I think not only 2014, but the past years, and I think the couple of next years will be very, very difficult years as well, because there are many, many imbalances in the world economy. There are many, many political imbalances. So it will take some time to solve these imbalances. If we talk about economical imbalances, if you look at Europe, very high debt, very slow population growth, so that is putting a lot of pressure on the economy there. If we look at Asia as well, debt is an issue. There are a lot of structural issues in many of the countries that have been growing very, very rapidly. So until a new foundation is created for the next cycle of growth, there will be a lot of friction, both economically, politically, socially, all around the world. And it will take some time to get to a new balanced economical world, a new balanced social world, and a new balanced political world that can create another few decades of higher growth and peace and stability.
So far, can we say any good news about the world economy? For example, people always expect the American economy recovery well. Do you think so?
Definitely. I mean, if you look at the major economies, Europe, Japan, China, there are basically only two bright spots. One is the US, that growth is there recovering very fast. And the second is Southeast Asia, which has been doing relatively well compared to the rest of the region. If you look at next year, then probably India will be another bright spot. But this year, I think only US and Asia has been to some extent, the engine of global growth.
How about China? The World Bank that I think the latest forecast about growth rate of China, because China economy got some problem.
That's normal, and I refer back to what I said earlier, that there are many imbalances and structural issues, and until those issues are not resolved, there cannot be a very high growth rate or a new growth cycle and a new growth model. So, China is also facing a lot of debt issues in the financial sector. As long as they do not solve it to some extent or put it on new fundamentals, the growth will be somewhat lower than the historical average. So that's why I think even for China, it's going to be a couple of tough years with growth rates probably close to 7 or maybe even below 7%.
And then how about Southeast Asia? Among 10 ASEAN countries, of course, we have a group of countries quite developed like Singapore, Brunei. But how about the developing countries like Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, Myanmar? Do you think among these group countries, which one quite advanced in getting new progress in economic development?
I think in terms of past results, probably Philippines had the most exciting and the most impressive results last year as well and this year as well. But in terms of changes happening or excitement about change, definitely Myanmar and Vietnam is taking the spotlights. If we talk, when we talk to all the investors, they are very excited about what's happening in Vietnam and what are the agendas for the change coming up. And definitely Vietnam has been opening up, and there's a lot of opportunities for early stage investors, but it kind of creates a lot of buzz and excitement in investment circles.
The foreign investor now give priority for Vietnam and Myanmar among ASEAN countries. But how about Thailand? Is it the economy now go down because some reason?
The Thai economy overall is very resilient because overall it has a good structure, it has a good tourism sector, it's very resilient, and it has a good domestic sector that is very resilient. But it's quite obvious that because of the political issues, it is performing sub its potential, way below its potential. So in that sense, I think their businesses will do well, those who are existing there, but it will be very difficult to attract a lot of new investments from abroad, given the political tensions that seems to be ongoing for quite some time until new elections and new government will be there.
At the moment now, if I ask you that a researcher, can you tell us that your big concern about Asia economy for 2014 and then the next year?
For 2014, the big concern, I would say, the event risk, such as conflicts with China related to the South China Sea or East Sea. And the other big concern is that it's a lot of debt being accumulated in most of the countries as well. These days, everybody seems to be very relaxed to some extent in monetary policies. So that can be very dangerous if it's going to excesses. I think these are the two major concerns with regard to ASEAN, so to speak. But they are generally manageable, I would say so.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mr. Attila. I think we take a short break now, but then we will move on. We learn about your sharing about your review about Vietnam economy so far.
Thank you.
Thưa quý vị, chúng ta sẽ nghỉ giải lao đôi phút và sau đó sẽ trở lại với ông Attila để nghe những chia sẻ về tình hình kinh tế Việt Nam theo nhận định riêng của ông trong năm 2014. Rất vui gặp lại quý vị trong chương trình Cận Cảnh ngày hôm nay. Thưa quý vị, đề tài trao đổi của chúng ta đó chính là một cái nhìn đối với nền kinh tế Việt Nam, kinh tế thế giới cũng như là kinh tế châu Á trong năm 2014 và những cái dự báo cho năm 2015. Chúng ta sẽ nghe chia sẻ của ông Attila Vazador, giám đốc điều hành công ty Project Asia, nghiên cứu và tư vấn kinh tế tại Singapore. Thưa quý vị, chúng ta đã nghe ông Attila nói về các cái nhìn của ông về kinh tế thế giới và kinh tế châu Á. Bây giờ thì chúng tôi mời, chúng ta sẽ có cuộc trao đổi kế tiếp về cái nhìn của ông về kinh tế Việt Nam. Mr. Attila, just come back to Vietnam. You told us about the comparison between Vietnam and Myanmar in the first part, and you told that the investor quite still excited with the development of Vietnam. So far, after 10 months of year 2014, which area you think in Vietnam economy developed quite, we got very good progress? Is it agriculture or manufacturing or any else?
I think if you look at the Vietnam economy, probably still the biggest development is manufacturing sector, and it's the engine of growth for Vietnam. That has been doing fantastic. That is attracting a lot of foreign interest and foreign investment. So that's the bright star, so to speak, of the economy. But I think many other areas have improved if you look at from a macroeconomic perspective. So, inflation is under control. The Vietnam Dong is very stable. Infrastructure investments are happening at a very high pace and with much better efficiency than in the past. So all these have been, bright spot and attracting foreign investment. In terms of culture, I'm not that convinced that things have changed dramatically. Productivity in the economy is still very low, and productivity and culture are quite interlinked in that sense. So I think it will be taking a bit more time to change the culture in Vietnam, to change the work ethics in Vietnam, to be able to increase also productivity, increase efficiency, not only in the government sector, but also in the private sector.
It's a very long-term matter. We have to take time. You told me.
It's a very long-term thing, changing culture, improving productivity, because it requires to fundamentally rethink the education sector, to fundamentally rethink the incentives and the punishments for people in the society, in the companies, in the corporates. So it will take a lot of time. If you look at the banking sector, it's kind of the culture is being changed. I think the fact that people are being held accountable for their bad behavior, it will create a much better and much risk-averse culture for the banks. And the same, VAMC now being able to take over bad debt and sell it at a discount, so to speak, it will force the banks to have a very different culture in terms of how they run their business. So steps have been taken to change the culture, but it's a long process and have to wait for a few good years until we say that the culture in Vietnam has been changed, the business culture have been changed dramatically.
And however, so far, do you think now we are coming into the recovery period, say goodbye with the crisis period already?
That's, I wouldn't say goodbye, but further away from the crisis period. There is a very good economic recovery trend, so to speak, but it's driven mostly by manufacturing, FDI manufacturing, and by public spending and investment. So these are good short-term solutions to kickstart the economy and put it on a growth trend. But without strong consumption and without a very strong private sector and private investments, the growth cannot be sustainable on a very long term. So that's why Vietnam still run the risk to be stepping back to a crisis mode if private consumption and investment is not growing fast enough. And of course, there are many global and regional events that can derail Vietnam from the growth. But I think the direction is good. And compared to what's happening on a global and regional level, Vietnam is doing much better than probably some of the peers or how it was doing before. So in that sense, we are quite optimistic about Vietnam.
Talk about economy restructure. That's a very heavy task for Vietnam since recent year. Which reform you think we do well since until now?
I think the best among all the measures have been in the area of monetary policy and banking sector reforms. And in that sense, I think the SBV did a fantastic job. That's where most of the action is happening, because that was the most stringent issue to solve. In terms of SOE reforms, I think steps are being taken, but it's very early to say that it's successful, and it's very shy steps and many mistakes in the process. So I wouldn't consider it as a success story yet. Banking sector reform, I think and monetary policy measures, I think those have been very, very successful. Stabilize the economy, so Vietnam economy is very stable. The bad debt is being handled. And I think one of the things that the people talk very little about is that there's a lot of confidence in Vietnam Dong, especially from the local population. So the dollarization of the Vietnam economy have been solved to a lot of extent, but very little people talk about it. It's still people talk about bad debt, which is going to take probably a couple of years to solve.
In addition to official economy, people also talk about the underground economy in Vietnam. Do you research about the underground economy in Vietnam and how you review their role?
It's definitely just like in any emerging market, the gray economy and the underground economy is a significant part of the economy. So in that sense, Vietnam is not an exception. To some extent, the fact that people believe much more in Vietnam Dong, they save in Vietnam Dong and put it in the banking system, much more transactions happening to the banking system. So some of this underground economy is moving towards the real economy and the real sector, but at a very, very slow pace. And it will take a lot of time to change this one. Even if you look at the tax collection, tax revenues somewhat improving, but it's very, very far away from where it should be. So I think these measures or some measures will be taken to deal with these in some future, but I think there are bigger burdens from the government to handle at this point than to act decisively on moving the underground economy into the real recorded economy.
Thank you, Mr. Attila. We will continue to talk about the opportunity and also challenge for next year in the next part. Thưa quý vị, chúng ta vừa trao đổi với ông Attila Vosdor về những tiến bộ cũng như là những mặt hạn chế của kinh tế Việt Nam trong năm 2014 theo quan điểm của ông. Và bây giờ thì chúng ta sẽ nghỉ giải lao đôi phút trước khi chúng ta tiếp tục cuộc trao đổi về những thách thức cũng như những cơ hội đặt ra cho nền kinh tế Việt Nam trong năm 2015. Chào quý vị, trở lại với chương trình Cận cảnh của FBNC. Đề tài nhìn lại kinh tế thế giới, kinh tế Á Châu và kinh tế Việt Nam trong năm 2014 và những dự báo cho năm 2015. Quả thật đây là một đề tài lớn và có thể chúng ta sẽ phải trở lại với đề tài này khi bước vào năm 2015, khi chúng ta có đầy đủ những dữ liệu, những thông tin về kết quả của 12 tháng qua. Tuy nhiên, chúng ta có dịp trao đổi với một chuyên gia nước ngoài đang quan sát, đang tìm hiểu, đang nghiên cứu về nền kinh tế Việt Nam, thì đó cũng là những cái điều chúng tôi nghĩ rằng rất là thú vị. Thưa quý vị, chúng ta đã trao đổi với ông Attila Vasdor, giám đốc điều hành của công ty Project Asia, chuyên nghiên cứu và tư vấn kinh tế. Và qua đó thì chúng ta thấy rằng ông Attila cũng đã chia sẻ với chúng ta những cái nhận định rất là chân thành về kinh tế Việt Nam. Và sau đây thì chúng ta sẽ trao đổi với ông tiếp về những cơ hội cũng như những cái thách thức đặt ra cho nền kinh tế Việt Nam trong thời gian tới. Mr. Attila, I think people got zero feeling that is it you feel quite optimistic about Vietnam economy in coming year. How about the challenge? How about the difficulty? Is it now we are always on a happy track?
It's never always positive and rosy and bullish in terms of economy. I think Vietnam economy has many challenges coming internally but also externally. If you look at the internal challenges, the state-owned enterprise reform and the IPO process is probably the biggest challenge for next year. And that has to be done next year because the government has a very high debt level and monetary policy kind of reached its scope and its efficiency. So from here on, Vietnam can grow only if it improves productivity. And in that sense, the state-owned enterprise is dragging down the economy. So in terms of improving productivity, the state-owned enterprise reform and IPOs are the way to go, and that has to be done next year, which is a very challenging task. And the second biggest challenging task, as I mentioned, is the very high level of debt in Vietnam, both at the government and public sector level, but also at the private sector level. So that has to be addressed by both the government and the private sector. And the top of all this, it coming the external challenge, which is, for example, in the retail sector next year, it will be open to foreign players. If you look at 2018, there has to be zero tariff within ASEAN. 2020, full ASEAN integration. So the competitiveness of the Vietnamese companies have to improve dramatically because now they have to compete with other regional and global players, not only abroad, but in Vietnam, within Vietnam as well. So it will be very tough for every economic player in the next couple of years. And probably the toughest will be for the SMEs, which are the least equipped to compete with foreign players.
And how about another challenge, that the war tension, the security, the regional security environment? Will we have to spend much money for defense?
I think definitely that's a very real threat, so to speak, especially after what happened in May this year, and definitely that will put pressure on the defense budget and on the country's budget to improve its defense system. But I think it's equally important to be able to diplomatically solve the issue and diplomatically have very good relationship with ASEAN, with Europe, with India, US, to make sure that Vietnam is a reliable partner for all these countries. Then obviously it's going to be a much safer environment in Asia and in Vietnam. And to deal with any potential external threats.
As the investment consultant, how you tell the foreign investor about business opportunity in Vietnam for 2015?
I think, as I said, we are very, very optimistic about Vietnam's prospects, and that's why we encourage many of our clients to look at Vietnam now, especially that, you know, some of the countries in the region are facing their own structural difficulties at the moment. Generally, what we advise to them is to do a very, very detailed market research to understand the dynamics of the market, because even though macroeconomic is doing very, very well, some of the sectors are struggling a lot. So that's why they have to understand the industry, they have to understand the market before coming in. And the second most important thing is to find the right local partner to be able to work together on deal with. I think these are the two most important messages we send to our investors. But other than that, I think if they can have the patience to go to the bureaucratic system of setting up a business here and setting up shop here, then they will have the potential to have very good success, because Vietnam economy will grow for quite some time, even if at lower or not as high pace as it used to be in the past.
But have not only foreign investor must be patient, but local investor also. We try to be patient and ready. And but however, people talk about always we talk about, since years ago we talk about the opportunity of TPP, opportunity of Asia ASEAN 2015. Do you consider it's still very good opportunity?
Some of these free trade agreements or economic community agreements create very high expectation that it will create an immediate impact. But in fact, these create impact on a longer term, on a longer horizon.
Not immediately?
Not immediately. So for example, if you look at the process since this whole ASEAN integration started, the cost of trading within ASEAN decreased around 15 to 30% in a 10-year period. So in a 10-year period, it's a lot, but if you look at 1 year, it's a very negligible change. So in that sense, I think the same will happen with EU, Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, the TPP, the ASEAN Economic Community, that on a long horizon it will have a tremendous impact, but on a short term it will impact only certain categories or certain industries in a significant way.
I remember you talk about human capital in Vietnam. It's one of a very important factor to attract business people, to attract business investment. Human capital mean now the young people in Vietnam. And do you have any advice, any suggestion to young people in Vietnam to do business for coming year?
I think we mentioned Myanmar and Vietnam, and they're both very exciting countries for, I think, investors look at for next year. And the main differentiating factor versus Myanmar for Vietnam is that it has a much better human capital. So for the investors who want, higher end manufacturing or a bit more complex businesses, they will choose Vietnam. But of course, Vietnam compared to rest of Asia, the human capital is very young, but in terms of skills and knowledge, is still a bit behind. So in that sense, education system reforms are very, very important. Now for the young generation, I think the most important thing is to be able to keep the Vietnamese entrepreneurial spirit. Because at this point, working actually with young people through an organization called ISEC, I see that many of the young people see their career as being an employee for a multinational company, for a good company, instead of being an entrepreneur. And if Vietnam will stop to have fantastic entrepreneurs, there will be no economic growth. So I think that's where the young people should focus on, despite the fact that many are discouraged by the bureaucracy, by the red tape in the entrepreneurship, and they don't have the patience like many of the existing entrepreneurs, but they have to have the patience, and they have to try to look at currently successful entrepreneurs as role models for the future, instead of looking just being an employee and having a career at a multinational company.
Thank you, Mr. Attila. I like that your suggestion. I think that we will see how the new trend happened in 2015, but we feel now the progress is going on. Yes, thank you again.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thưa quý vị, chúng ta vừa có cuộc trao đổi với ông Attila Vazhdor về những cái nhìn riêng của ông về kinh tế thế giới, châu Á cũng như Việt Nam trong năm 2014 và đặc biệt là những triển vọng của năm 2015. Chúng tôi rất là thích thú với lời chia sẻ cuối của ông đối với các bạn trẻ Việt Nam. Chúng tôi nghĩ rằng là chúng ta rất là nhất trí là với người Việt Nam chúng ta thì cái tinh thần doanh nghiệp Việt Nam sẽ phải cần được củng cố, cần được phát huy hơn nữa để chúng ta có thể có được những năm kế tiếp cái kinh tế Việt Nam sẽ phát triển tốt. Xin hẹn gặp lại quý vị trong chương trình Cận Cảnh lần sau.